Hello my fellow chemists. In this video we're going to take a look at metals in the periodic table. This is labeled as a basic video because there's really no background understanding that you need to have to be able to follow along with everything that I'm talking about in the lecture. So let's get started and talk about metals in the periodic table. No, not that kind of metal. Those kind of metals. And in fact, almost all the elements in the periodic table are metals. There's only about 22 elements that are not metals. And you can see there is a dividing line if I kind of trace across here. As you go diagonally across the periodic table down here, this is the dividing line between the metals and the nonmetals. So this small group over here are the nonmetals. And everything else over here, with the exception of hydrogen. Hydrogen is the only non-metal that's on the left-hand side of the periodic table. Everything else is metals. And metals are kind of divided into three main categories on the periodic table. This first category down here, this group of 10 elements down here, or this block of 10 groups of elements, are the transition metals. The elements that are in group 2, those are the alkali earth metals. And the elements in group 1, with the exception of hydrogen, these are the alkali metals. So we have metals divided into three categories, but just what are metals? What are they really defined as? I'm sure if you saw a piece of metal, you could, differentiate that from a piece of wood. But what are the major properties of metals? Well, metals have four main properties that have been identified by chemists. And the first property that metals have is that they have luster, so they are shiny. Think of any jewelry that somebody wears is shiny, so it's usually made out of a metal. Second property that metals have is they have thermal conductivity. Which means heat can transfer through the metal. Think of having a metal frying pan on a stove, and if you leave it on the stove long enough, if it's a fully metal frying pan, and then you grab the handle, the heat will have traveled through the rest of the pan and it'll burn your hand. So it has thermal or heat conductivity. The third property of metals is that they have electrical conductivity. Put a little electron there for electrical. And electrical conductivity just means that electrons can flow through the metals. Think of the copper wiring that is in your house that allows the lights to turn on and turn off. And then the fourth and final property of metals is they are malleable. And malleable just means that if you heat them up, they will be able to bend as opposed to break. So that's a very important property of metals. Think of in the medieval ages when they would make swords or armor, they would heat metal up and they would hammer on it to bend it. So those are four properties of metals. So when you're talking about metals, all these elements that are in pink here, they tend to have those properties. And then these elements in blue, the nonmetals, do not have those properties. These elements in green here, these are called metalloids. They're kind of on the dividing line between metals and nonmetals. And they have some properties of metals and some properties of nonmetals. So let's take a look at these three main categories of metals and talk about some of the important facts about them. We'll start off with the transition metals. So the transition metals go from group 3 here all the way over into group 13 over here. And what the transition metals are is they're meant to be a bridge, basically, between the alkali metals and alkali earth metals and the nonmetals. And what do you mean as a bridge? Well, they tend to have much higher melting points and much higher densities than the alkali metals and alkali earth metals. And they can also be used as catalysts in reactions, which means they can make a reaction go faster, but they're not used up in the reactions. So they kind of bridge the properties of nonmetals with the properties of the alkali metals and alkali earth metals. So, some of the more important or well known uh, transition metals and their uses are, if you take a look at element 26, you have iron, and then you have element 25, manganese, right here, and element number 24, chromium. If you mix those three elements together, they will produce steel. And steel is very commonly used as a building agent because it is stronger and more malleable than just iron on its own. Now, if you wanted to make stainless steel, then what they would do is they would also mix a little bit of nickel in with it. So chromium, manganese, and iron mixed together make steel, and then if you mix in some nickel with it as well, that'll make stainless steel. All of these transition elements as well, when they kind of mix or make compounds, they tend to make colored solutions or colored compounds. And that's because they have unpaired d electrons. And those unpaired d electrons tend to cause a color when they are interacted or reacted with. Uh, Other important elements in the periodic table is if you take a look at iron, cobalt, and nickel. So iron, cobalt, and nickel, you tend to think that metals are magnetic. Well, the only three elements in the entire periodic table that actually have magnetic fields are iron, cobalt, and nickel. So anything that's a magnet or has a magnetic field is either iron, cobalt, or nickel. None of the other metals have any magnetic field associated with them. So all magnetic fields are either made from iron, cobalt, or nickel. If you take a look at copper, right over here, copper is widely used because it has very good electrical conductivity. Most of your houses, the wiring in it is copper because it is cheap, very plentiful, and has very good electrical conductivity. The elements below it, gold and silver, they actually have higher electrical conductivity than copper, but they're not used that much for wiring in houses because they are so expensive compared to copper. Notice how all these elements in this one group here have similar properties of very good electrical conductivity. That goes along with when we talked about um, Dmitry Mendeleev and the properties in the periodic table based upon groups they're in. Elements in the same group have similar properties. That's an example of it. Elements in this group here have very good electrical conductivities. If we just take a look at one more element in the transition metals and a common use that it has, if we look at titanium over here, titanium has some properties where it is, for its strength, it is very light. So it's a very light and strong metal. And because of that, titanium is often used when making fighter aircraft. It's also used if, unfortunately, you need a hip replacement. Titanium is what is used in the hip replacement. And because it is so strong and light, it's often used as pipes in nuclear power plants. So those are some examples of uses of transition metals in society. Now we're going to come across and take a look at the alkali earth metals here. Before we do that, you'll notice this little star, these two little stars here. That just means that these lanthanides and actinides are fit in this area here. They just draw them in the bottom part of the periodic table here so that the periodic table doesn't look super elongated. but they do fit right in this area here. And they are part of the transition metal series here. They do fit in there. So if you take a look at the alkali earth metals, so those are the elements that are in group 2. And some of the more important uses or functions of the alkali earth metals, if we take a look at this first element here, beryllium. Beryllium is used primarily in making X-ray tubes. So anytime you go in for an X-ray, the X-ray machine, part of the X-ray machine is made out of beryllium. And that's because beryllium has a property where it is transparent to X-rays. So X-rays go right through it, so it's kind of invisible to X-rays. The X-rays kind of want to see you. They don't want to see the beryllium that the tubes are made out of. So beryllium is often used in X-ray machines. Then if we go right beneath it there, magnesium, element number 12. Magnesium is very commonly found in antacids. So if you have an upset stomach, you use that for antacids. Also found in laxatives. And it's commonly found in chlorophyll in plants, as well as in fireworks. Magnesium, when you light it on fire or burn it, it burns extremely bright at about the same intensity as the sun. So it's very often used in making fireworks. If we take a look at one more alkali earth metal, we look at calcium down here. Calcium is found in bones, teeth, shells of animals, and exoskeletons of things such as crabs, lobsters, and insects. It's often found in nature naturally as calcium carbonate, CaCO3. And it's also found or used in the manufacture of toothpaste. So whenever you use toothpaste, you got calcium that you're being used as well. Now, the alkali earth metals, they tend to be, in general, again, they're in the same group here, so they tend to have similar properties. Some of the properties they have that are similar between all of them is they're silvery in color, they're shiny, and they're soft. So those are similar properties for all the metals that are in group 2. So if we take a look at, finally, the alkali metals, the elements in group 1, with the exception of hydrogen, some of the more important or more well-used alkali metals, you could take a look first at sodium. Sodium is found huge in salt, that would be NaCl, sodium chloride. And then sodium is also naturally found as sodium nitrate, NaN03, and that is used for preserving meats. So back in the days before we had refrigerators, sodium was very widely used to preserve meats so that they would last for much, or stay good for a much longer time. If we take a look down at the element above it there, element number 3, lithium. Lithium has become very important in recent times because of its use in batteries. So if you have a electric car, the battery that was used to make that electric car most likely has a significant amount of lithium in it. And then if we take a look one more element down, K, that is potassium, element number 19. Potassium is used in fertilizer and also in soap. So any soap in your house probably has potassium in it. And any food that you're eating that was from a garden probably was fertilized with some form of potassium. So there you have it. Those are the groups of metals that we have in the periodic table: transition metals, alkali earth metals, and alkali metals. Some of the more widely used metals and the properties that they have. In the next video, we're going to take a look at this cluster of elements over here, the nonmetals, and also with hydrogen, because he's a nonmetal as well, and take a look at what they're used for and what some of their properties are. I hope you learned something. If you did, don't forget to subscribe and like, and I will see you in the next video.